Hello and welcome to this dungeon tanking building guide. I've been asked multiple times about the setups I'm using in dungeons, and since there isn't any competitiveness or scores in those, I've never had the opportunity to show off the build I'm using like I do with trials in my world record videos. The build I'm gonna show you is a build I'm using for pledges, dungeon carries and trifectas, so it's a balance between maximizing groups DPS and survivability. There are ways to optimize the DPS further, but that would hurt the survivability too much. I'll try to avoid going into details why some options are best, for example of traits. I might cover that topic in a different video though. Okay, so let's start out with gear. First I'm gonna show you the setups I am using, and then also different variants if you're running with healer or if you're a beginner and you have to use crafted gear before you can farm better gear. So this is the setup I'm using for trash. Spoiler of Ruin with One Piece Trainee. Now I'm using Yolnakrim, but you can also use Turning Tide and Crimson Oath in that place. Olorim Backbite is very easy to proc with Caltrops, and Void Bash, as in the Vateshran Sword board, really helps with stacking the ads faster. As for jewelry trades, I feel like Swift is the best, so you can catch up if you're damage dealers, but you can also use Infuse because that's the trade that's best for boss setups. It's best to make your first set of jewelry infused, but if you wanna min-max and get a second set of Olorim jewelry, you should make it Swift and switch between those. Another important trade is charged on your backbar staff. If you run with a healer, we're gonna assume that they're gonna provide major courage, so you don't need Olorim anymore. In that case, you can put Crimson on your backbar. It's gonna proc from Pulsar because it applies minor protection. Now, this is the setup for bosses. So one thing to mention about the weights, you don't really need to have light waist and a heavy head. You can just use the same weights as shown in the previous spreadsheet, because it will probably be easier to set it up this way, but this setup gives you the maximum amount of armor, even though it's a very slight bonus. So if you're gonna run Turning Tide, you wanna use Nazarite to prolong it. I'm gonna talk about how that interaction works later on in the video. Another options are Yolnakrim and Necratis. You also wanna use Puncturing Remedy, as in Master Sword and Board. It's gonna make your survival really easy. You obviously wanna have Infused Eye Staff so that you can proc Crusher for the whole duration. Triple Infuse with Trico's Reduction provides the best bonus for your sustain. You can also use Spolder with One Piece Trainee for this setup. Now with healer you wanna change the Olorim to War Machine for both of these setups. I also wanted to show a setup with only crafted gear for absolute beginners. The enchants are different here, even though Tri-Stat is obviously better, but if you're a beginner you're not gonna be able to afford those. There's no separate trash and boss gear, because this is only supposed to be a temporary measure, because you don't have to min-max that much at this point, and it's only supposed to allow you to farm the proper gear. You might go over the armor cap if you have this exact gear golded out, but I'm not expecting new players to gold out their gear. If you don't want to use add-ons to switch gear, or if you can't because you're playing on console, you can just use one of the boss setups everywhere. Now about the skills. First I'm gonna show some baseline setups for trash and bosses, and then mention all the useful skills because you'll need to adapt to some boss fights. So first skill, Pierce Armor. Not much to say about this one. Basically your melee taunt that also applies a lot of penetration. Second skill is Razor Caltrops. You're gonna throw it before we engage with a trash pack that applies Major Breach and also slows the enemies, and also it's gonna proc your Olorim. The next skill is Ignis Shield. It's gonna increase your survivability, and also it will allow you to turn your Magicka into stamina. The next, Reverberating Bash. Any morph of this skill would work, it doesn't have to be reverberating. It's used to proc Vateshran Sword and Board. If you're not using Vateshran Sword and Board, you can use Burning Talons in that place. Next is Green Dragonblood, your main heal, and Balance, your source of major resolve and also source of almost infinite Magicka sustain. Chains, which you're gonna need to pull in the ads. Now Pulsar, this skill is gonna apply Minor Mangle to enemies, which reduces their max health by 10%. And also on top of that, since you're gonna be using charged stuff, it's guaranteed to always proc status effects, which in this case with Ice Staff will be Minor Brittle, which increases critical damage taken, and also it has great synergy with the next ability, Elemental Blockade. Now this blockade snares all chilled enemies, and all enemies will be chilled because of your Pulsar. So basically throwing Elemental Blockade and then using Pulsar will snare all the enemies. And the last, Enrage, your Range Taunt. Now, this is a boss setup without a mag decaying group and without the need to chain any ads. Instead of Caltrops, you're gonna use Stone Giant, which will apply a stagger that will increase enemies' damage taken. Instead of Reverberating Bash, you're gonna slot Engulfing Flames, which increases enemies' flame damage taken. Instead of Chains, you will use Overflowing Altar, which allows your teammates to heal by attacking enemies and also grants them synergy that heals them to full. And instead of Pulsar, you will use Destructive Clench, which is an ability that applies guaranteed minor brittle and also major maim, which will decrease enemies damage done. Now if you have a mag decking group, you don't need to use Engulfing Flames. In that case you can use Revealing Flare or any of the morphs that will grant you major protection, reducing your damage taken by 10%. If you have to use chains in that boss fight, you will have to remove Stone Giant, since it's your least important damage debuff, and you will slot chains instead. Now, personally, I like to have balance on front bar and chains on back bar, but you can just swap them around and have front bar chains and back bar balance. And in this setup, if you have a mag decking group, you can remove the Engulfing Flames and put Stone Giant back in. For some of the harder bosses, you can use this setup. This is the setup I'm using for Stone Garden last boss, which is Arcasis. It's one of the hardest hard mode dungeon bosses in the game, and this is the setup I'm using whenever fighting that boss. If you have a mag decay, you can once again remove Engulfing Flames and instead slot defensive stance, which allow you to spend stamina to gain damage shield, and it will also reduce cost of your block and increase your block mitigation. You can also put chains in that spot if the fight requires it. Now about ultimates. These are the ultimates you're gonna use. Front bar Temporal Guard, which will passively decrease your damage taken while it's slotted, and back bar Aggressive Horn, which will grant your allies major force and resource buffs. Now I'm gonna talk about a bunch of other useful skills. Immovable. This skill grants you greatly increased block mitigation and also grants you immunity to crowd control. One of the examples where this skill is gonna be really useful is Moonhunter Keep last boss. You wanna use it so that you don't get feared by the totems. Next one is an alternative to either Horde or Temporal Guard. Bar is basically an ult that gives your allies decent damage shield, which might be useful if you can't out-heal some mechanic. Next one is Crushing Shock, which is basically a ranged interrupt. One of the places where it's really useful is Fangler's hard mode last boss. Next up, two different morphs for a single ability. It's up to you whichever you choose. Elemental Drain grants additional minor magic steal, which shouldn't be an issue to keep up depending on your damage dealers. For example, Magplars and Magna Blades shouldn't have issue keeping up this debuff by themselves. The other morph is Elemental Susceptibility. This morph lasts an entire minute, so it's much easier to keep up. One place where this ability is really useful is once again Moonhunter Keep last boss hard mode, so that you can debuff the wolves while staying in the middle of the main boss. Next up is Burning Talon. It's an ability that snares enemies around you, and one place where it's really useful is March of Sacrifices last boss hard mode, so that you can snare all the wolves. Another ability I'd like to mention is Ignis Weapons. Now your DDs should have access to these buffs by themselves through potions. The thing is, this buff lasts almost a minute, so you might want to use it before fight for yourself, for example to boost your Engulfing Flames value. So you can use this skill before fight and change this skill to something different. Once again, if you don't want to or can't switch setups with add-ons, just stick to one of the boss setups with chains. Moving on to champion points for trash. In the blue tree, you're gonna want to grab all the mitigation slottables, which are Duelist's rebuff, which reduces your damage taken from single target attacks, Enduring Resolve, which reduces your damage taken from damage over time attacks, Ironclad, which reduces your damage taken by direct damage attacks, and Unassailable, which reduces your damage taken from area of effect attacks. Now in the red tree, you're gonna want to grab Fortified, which increases your armor, Celerity, which increases your movement speed, Boundless Vitality, which increases your max HP, and Rejuvenation, which increases all of your recoveries. For boss setup, you wanna swap out Celerity to Bracing Anchor. Race. The best race for tanking is by far Nord. The racials are Resist Frost, which increases your max health and frost resistance, Stalwart, which increases your stamina and generates Ultimate, which is a great passive for a tank, and Ragged. Now this pass is what makes Nord so overpowered, because 2600 armor translates into 7.28% damage reduction when close to armor cap. Another decent option, though not as good as Nord, is Imperial. Their passives are Tough, which increases max health, Imperial Metal, which increases max stamina, and Red Diamond, which reduces cost of all abilities by 6%. Food. The best food for tanking is Orzorga Smoked Bear Haunch, which increases your max health, health recovery, stamina recovery, and magicka recovery. Another good option if you can't afford Orzorga Smoked Bear Haunch is Bewitched Sugar Skulls, which increases your max health, max stamina, max magicka, and health recovery. Now attributes. I like to put all my points into health. but you can put some points into stamina and magicka if you're using Orzorga's food and you're having trouble playing with lower maximum resource pools. Munduses. The best Mundus is by far the Achonak, which increases your magicka recovery. If you're not a Nord and you're using Orzorga's food, you can also use the Lady, which increases your armor. Potions. You're gonna want to use a potion that restores your health, stamina and magicka. You can craft it by combining Columbine, Bugloss and Mountain Flower. There's also another potion which is way better, but you shouldn't be using it because it's so expensive. It's a potion that grants Heroism, Stamina and Magicka, and you craft it by combining Columbine, Dragon's Blood and Dragon Realm. Rotation. I'm gonna talk a bit about what you should do in trash fights and at boss fights, also showing it on the screen. So as you can see, you should start off trash packs with caltrops and then immediately swap to your back bar so you can proc Olrim this way. Then on that bar you'll cast either Elemental Blockade or use your Wrenchstone if there's any dangerous enemy. After that you swap to your front bar and you will use Pierce Armor to proc Yolnacreen, or if you already use your Wrenchstone or if you're not wearing Yolnacreen, you can immediately cast Reverberating Bash to proc Vateshran's Pool. After that you swap to your back bar and spam Pulsar and chain remaining enemies. Now for bosses you're gonna want to start off with your taunt, obviously. After that make sure to apply Minor Brittle and Major Maim with Destructive Reach, and then use your horn after proccing Turning Tide's Major Vulnerability. Nazariah will buff all these debuffs to about 30 seconds, so that's the start, and after that you just try to keep up all your debuffs. So that's it. I obviously couldn't have covered everything in such a short video, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. There are no stupid questions, and see you in the next video.